都讲得清清楚楚，我觉得每一版页都可以讲15分钟，但是呢，也是给我一个非常好的一个概念，我们初步的感觉到底一个智慧城市，我們這個創新創業是怎麼的一回事？謝謝你。好啦，咁下一位，我哋下一位咧，冇事啊，轉拉鏡先啦。我哋下一位咧，即將會喺台上面同我哋演講嘅嘉賓咧，就係嚟自啦我哋呢一個 Pelham Grey USESBN Youth and Women Entrepreneurship Task Force 呢位叫做 Pedro 嘅先生。咁咧佢將會為我哋帶嚟呢個題目就係 Business-led Forging and Economic Growth for Asian Pacific Youth Entrepreneurs。咁你其實覺得都係話俾大家聽，究竟我哋喺亞太區嘅年青人，我哋咁多位嘅年青嘅創業者，我哋點樣可以咧捉緊機遇喺一個咧經濟越嚟越進步嘅呢個環境當中咧，可以突圍而出，將自己想傳遞俾世界嘅信息，將自己想話俾我哋世界各地聽嘅一啲概念咧，去帶俾我哋更加多唔同嘅朋友嘅。All right, Mr. Pedro, now is your time. Welcome.
Slides. Oh, here we go. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. For me, it was quite a short drive, even though I'm Portuguese, but I live in Hong Kong for the past 7.5 years. And I'm very thrilled to be here today, especially to see what's happening with the entrepreneurial and the startup ecosystem here in Macau, and also with the potential for all this Greater Bay Area. The topic that I'm bringing today is business leapfrogging and economic growth. Because what I think is that the time where we used to see the growth in the US, the Silicon Valleys, and even afterwards in Europe, is kind of migrating towards this side of the world. And what we're seeing is that if we look back a couple of years ago where we see the Asia kind of trying to keep up with the pace, we're actually seeing this time that Asia and the Pacific, they're actually reinventing a lot of what probably the world will experience in the near future. So I'd like to bring 4 points to this brief talk. The first of them is the skill set global shift. So what we're seeing is a huge shift in skills around the world that entrepreneurs will need to learn very fast. The second point is the supporting ecosystems and the entrepreneurship leapfrogging. So how can we somehow go for countries in Asia Pacific, Macau, Greater Bay Area, and other places as well, where there was very little history on entrepreneurship. There is a lot of history in business, big business SMEs, but the concept of entrepreneurship is quite recent. And how can we suddenly put them at the same stage or the same level of what's happening in different countries all around the world? The third point is working hard and aiming towards success. I think that all the startups that will be here during this weekend, they will be, and they have to be doing this. And then the last point, which is very dear to my heart, which kind of somehow plugs in with the United Nations, the Economic and Social Committee for Asia and the Pacific, which is called how can we somehow create social good, and at the same time, how can we create entrepreneurship with a bit of impact? So the first point is the skill set in terms of shift. I put there between brackets global because it's not just in a couple of places. We're not speaking about all this artificial intelligence and automation of jobs just in specific parts of the world. We're actually seeing this as almost as a universal or a global trend. So 7 years ago, when we started doing entrepreneurship in Hong Kong, and I actually launched one of the first incubation programs in Hong Kong with the Hong Kong University, the MBA school called the Business Lab. At that time, what we had a couple of entrepreneurs that wanted to do their own startup, and then everyone else was focusing on the traditional business. So banking, the insurance industry, trading, and so on. So 7 years ago, we had a couple of what I called very entrepreneurial or very adventurous people that actually decided to start doing something towards their startup. Now, 7 years until today's date, what we see two types of people that somehow are joining this kind of entrepreneurship club. In one hand, we've got the classic entrepreneurs, which are the ideas people, which are the creative people, which are people that somehow understand that there are a couple of problems and there are a group of people that would like these problems to be solved, and somehow they would then somehow start their startup. They would go for investment, the rounds, the Series A's, B's, and C's, and so on, and they will with the goal of potentially becoming a big company. But what we're also seeing is that the trend of the classic education, where the students used to go for the classic banking, accounting, and so on, what we're seeing is a huge shift or a lot of migration of these types of classic studies students that are actually also studying entrepreneurship. So, for example, for the courses that we run at Hong Kong U and other places in terms of entrepreneurship, we're seeing not only entrepreneurs that want to launch their startups, but we're also seeing all these people that want to, once they finish their study, go back to do their banking, their insurance, their trading, but they realize that companies today require a certain level of innovation, a certain level of understanding of this kind of rapid prototyping, of this kind of rapid iteration. Before, we used to see the classic companies hiring the person for a specific job, and they will have this kind of vertical skill set, and this would be great. But what we're seeing is not only the companies that are in this slide, but also probably I would dare to say the majority of companies are welcoming people that somehow have some sort of a knowledge in entrepreneurship. They understand that innovation is out there, they understand that artificial intelligence is out there, they understand that all this big data, all this transformation, digitization, and also reinventing themselves is there for them to continue to operate and to continue to do business. So if this was slide, I brought this slide on purpose because this was presented 2 years ago, where they said in 2018, so down the line, 75% of software development will include some sort of artificial intelligence. Now, 2018 is now, okay? So if you look at, for example, Microsoft Windows and a lot of these softwares, majority of them have some sort of component in artificial intelligence. So this is being done right now as we speak, and not to mention what's happening on the airports in terms of government, civil society, and so on. We also see a variety of cool stuff happening. For example, if we looked at this video a couple of years ago, this would be like a fantasy, right? Like from Marvel and Iron Man. Today, this suit is being sold on Selfridges. And the price is not that bad. I mean, it's around 340,000 sterling, so around 445,000 US dollars. We're actually interviewing one of the guys that was testing this suit in a forest before it went live. So we're doing a couple of things with entrepreneurs as well, trying to capture what best is being done out there. Now, what also is scary is that, for example, for my generation, where entrepreneurship came potentially later on, what we're seeing is that the very early generations, they're using all this technology, all this big data, all this artificial intelligence almost seamless. So in this video, for example, we can see a very young girl that is using her e-wallet on her watch. By the way, I don't have e-wallet, I'm still the old-fashioned style, but she's using e-wallet on her watch and she's going to the supermarket to buy stuff. So this is the new generation that they're kind of already growing with this. So that's why the majority of the startups, even though a lot of these concepts may be a bit down the line, but they need to start to be understood today. Number two, what we're also seeing is that 7 years ago, there was a couple of scattered entrepreneurial ecosystems that whoever wanted to do entrepreneurship or learn entrepreneurship or become a startup or an entrepreneur would have to understand and kind of ask around and probe around to understand where they could get more information, where they could plug in to potential getting joint ventures, partners, doing more business cross regions and even internationally. What we're seeing today is that these ecosystems are here today. They're probably, the majority of them start being launched 4 years ago, and they're quite robust right now. Places like Macau is building a very robust ecosystem. Places like the Greater Bay Area, places like Hong Kong, where we have mentoring, R&D, legal support, pitching competitions. If you guys go to Hong Kong, I'm not sure about the reality here, but in Hong Kong, probably every 3 days there's a pitching competition from Alibaba, Microsoft, whoever they are. So, I mean, you can just keep on pitching your idea eventually if you want to get funding and so on. So this ecosystem is quite sophisticated and quite mature. And then also what we try to do as part of our task force from the United Nations is to kind of get the best practices of what's happening in some of these places in Asia Pacific. And by the way, I believe that in Asia Pacific, things need to be very specific. Silicon Valley was great many years ago, and there was the internet bubble and so on. Things went down, they came back up. But it's a very specific ecosystem for very specific entrepreneurs and for very specific business concepts. What I'm seeing here is that places like China, Greater Bay Area, Hong Kong, potentially what I call the GMS, or the Greater Macau region, which comprises of Thailand, Vietnam, and other countries there on that peninsula, is that they have a very specific ecosystem. So it's important that we do understand the main lingo, but at the same time we create something specific for here. I'm also honored to be an honorary member of AGEPS, and AGEPS has been doing a phenomenal work, especially here in Macau. What they do is they connect the business, the Portuguese-speaking business ecosystems or business countries, such as Portugal, Spain, countries in Africa and also in South America. We're talking about Brazil, Mexico, and so on, for them to plug in here with Macau or with Asia Pacific through Macau. So by the way, for those of you that will be here in November, I would like to extend my invitation for you to join the MIF, which is the Macau International Investment Fair, where there's going to be a huge committee of Brazilian companies, African companies, Portuguese companies, all exhibiting here in the Venetian as well. We also, in regards to the IET, or to the ESBN task force, what we do is, this is our regional map. So what we have is, we cover 62 member and associate member countries, and in terms of Asia Pacific, we cover all the way from Asia, from Central Asia, which is Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, all the way to the Pacific Islands. And our goal is twofold. In one hand, we want to identify what is happening in entrepreneurship in Asia Pacific, and this is as part of a supporting ecosystem. And number two, we also want to kind of lead and collaborate with a lot of different companies, organizations, and governments that may wish to kind of somehow create collaborations amongst these countries. This was a photo of the Business Lab last year, so this is our section of entrepreneurs in Hong Kong U MBA class last year. We have a variety of projects coming up. Some of them are quite futuristic. These guys were doing frames out of 3D printing. Now, 3 years ago, it was kind of unknown and not so much discussed. Today is almost a common goal. We also have a team, a very interesting team. They're kind of focusing on how to bring agriculture to the city center. So in Hong Kong to Causeway Bay, so they're creating all these special herbs, edible herbs to sell to all these 5-star restaurants. And we also do a lot of collaboration with different organizations and corporations. This, for example, was with Citibank, where we plugged in with them and we kind of plugged in with different ecosystems in Asia Pacific, where Citibank was very keen to connect with entrepreneurial ecosystems in a way that they could somehow do something in terms of empowering the consumer endpoint in terms of digital. We also done a lot of stuff in terms of robotics and drones. So these are some of the cool stuff. India Tech Pitch Day, this was recently happening as well, where we kind of brought these communities from Indian startups to pitch in Hong Kong, and therefore creating all these kind of partnerships, connections with VCs and so on. So what I'm saying is that I would have loved to have become an entrepreneur today, even though I've been doing entrepreneurship for many years, because today the pen is set. Today what we have is we have this phenomenal ecosystem where it's quite easy for people that are launching their startups to somehow connect and collaborate, not only in Macau or Hong Kong, but all across Asia Pacific. Now, for those that are entrepreneurs, you also know that it's a hard journey. So you have to work hard. First of all, you have to understand where the problems are, and number two, you have to kind of create solutions at a certain speed so that you don't get killed by your competition. So if we look at the odds, and this was an article that came out, this was for 2017 by a paper called Research Briefs. What they say is that the venture capital funnel shows odds of becoming a unicorn are about 1%. So how about this for optimism? Okay, so for those of you that want to somehow start your startup, the probability of becoming this huge unicorn or somehow raise all these funds and becoming extremely successful, either by your own business or by partnership and mergers and acquisition, is actually 1%. This was the data for last year. So if we have an example for 1,027 companies, tech companies that were seed-backed in 2017, we had 9 companies that actually reached the round 9. Now, a lot of stuff happening. Some of them went to the value of that, some of them did M&A and exit and so on. But what we're seeing is that the odds are not in favor. So I still consider all entrepreneurs extremely brave to start something and kind of to invest their time and to invest a considerable amount of time and money for them to pursue their dreams. I'd also like to kind of bring one idea, which is everyone's focusing on the unicorn. Everyone wants to be extremely successful. But by the way, bear in mind that you have to start with an idea. This idea has to address a problem. And between the idea and the unicorn, you have to pass by the phase which is called the mountain goat. Now, I don't know if you guys know what a mountain goat is. It's kind of those goats with the big horns, and they just keep on going up those rocky mountains. Some of them fall, they start again, and so on. So before you get there, you'll probably have to go to the mountain goat. And probably the middle part is where you really test if you really want to continue to becoming an entrepreneur and continue to supersede your dream. Now, as a last point for this brief speech, I would like to bring is that it's great to create. It's great to have ideas. It's great to solve problems. But it's also great to create the present and the future that our current generations and our kids and subsequent generations will be keen on leaving. So on all the majority of the entrepreneurial programs that we get involved, we bring this topic what's called sustainable entrepreneurship, which is we bring the sustainable development goals. These are goals determined by the United Nations, and these were actually adopted by the majority of countries. So if you guys go online and you check sustainable development goals, you've got ex-president or former President Obama kind of saying their commitment. You've got the guys from Europe, the guys from Asia confirming their commitment. I just came recently from Beijing. There was this event for all these entrepreneurs, and they were all kind of also committing to the SDGs. And as you see, it's almost a huge cycle, so it's very easy to miss. But if you kind of somehow, as a startup, put your efforts towards a couple of them, it will actually can make a difference. And we're talking about examples. For example, if you guys have heard about a place called Kamikatsu in Japan. It's a city, it's called a trashless town. Now, it's not a trashless town because I think they still have around 2% of trash, but what they have done is they have reinvented the whole city in a way that everything is recyclable. Okay, so there's very, very little trash around. So I was wondering is, how can entrepreneurs continue to pursue business, continue to focus on making money, continue on focusing on kind of going through the rocky goat and kind of becoming a unicorn, but at the same time, focus on things that can be making an impact for the planet today. We're also launching a social impact lab, which is an impact or a lab or a program to be focusing on social impact. So we bring social impact to the core DNA of the startups. And as a last point, I would like to leave this session with 3 keynotes. One of them is for all entrepreneurs and startups here for this forum. I would like to wish that you guys are very successful. So create, iterate, pivot, and succeed. Number 2, connect with your local ecosystem. And this can be in Macau. I mean, EPIM is doing a lot of things in Macau. Join the meet, join the 3 days, join also the event in November and all the other ecosystem. By all means, come and join us at the task force, so www.connectyet.org, also with ageps.com. But at the last point is, you guys or the startups today are responsible, and I would like everyone to take this responsibility very dearly, to create the present and paint the future for current and future generations. So we're counting on the startups. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you. Obrigado. 好啦，咁我見到啦，真係我哋咁多位嘉賓咧，喺短短15分鐘裏邊係想將最多嘅資訊同埋咧概念同大家分享嘅。咁所以喺呢度第一件事就辛苦晒咁多位翻譯嘅朋友啦嚇。咁可能真係呢啲嘉賓講得快少少。咁咧同埋咁多位提一提大家，我哋真係現場係有即時傳譯嘅服務嘅 simultaneous interpretation service is available in this room。所以咁多位如果需要嘅話咧，可以去我哋